Hi everyone, good to see you all. Welcome to the Unconference for stage 1. And first of all, thank you and well done for all presenting at Codegarden. So good. Really awesome talks, and it's almost like we're there in real life, but you can't give big hugs like we would in real life, unfortunately. So yeah, big well done. And we've got some questions, so I'll jump straight into some questions. So Kat and Sean, for your session, I'm sure all of us have probably had these requests from clients, where we can have themed sites or like no set templates, I think was something that you mentioned, Sean, which is great for flexibility. But how do you enforce, maybe enforce isn't the right word, guide best practice? Because when you give people flexibility, they will take flexibility and they'll do what they want.
Yeah, we've got on that project, we handle a lot of the content ourselves for some of the sites. So for those ones, we've got a team of content editors who work on it day in, day out. And then for the sites where they've got their own content editor teams, they communicate with our project coordinators using the wireframes of the components. We build up that initial look and feel for each site. So we initially set them up and then we leave it with them to manage. And then there's like a level of support ongoing. So if they have an issue or they're not sure, they can just ask, and one of the team will come through. If the content team at our end needs additional support, they would then come to like Kat or myself to get the developers involved. But on a day-to-day basis, developers aren't that involved in the content anymore because of the initial setup that we put in place.
Awesome. And from a development perspective, Kat, is there anything in creating such a flexible site, any tips that you would give to developers?
I think it's definitely been quite a big learning curve, because obviously clients come up with things that you may not have even thought of. So I would say try where you can to keep things very generic, because when you start getting specifically tied down to a certain style or client on what they want, it's not easy then to undo it and do another version for another client. Whereas if it's quite generic, you can basically use it as a template, and it's more of a copy and paste job rather than having to undo it all. It just saves a lot of time having to recode things. And I think there is the trade-off obviously with having too many options in the CMS, but I think giving them more options for them to do things themselves is better, because it sort of saves time going back and forth with development. If they can toggle certain things on and off, that very simple, like in the talk I talked about the card section, and they can change whether it's a grid or a carousel. They can turn the arrows if they want off, and the dots. They can change the speed. It's just little things like that speed up. It doesn't involve, we don't have to be involved as a developer, and it just makes the client a lot happier because they can do it themselves.
Yeah, a wee bit more work up front, but saves so much time in the long run. Awesome. And Rachel, I really enjoyed your session. I always do when you chat about accessibility, because you make it really understandable for, like, I'm like you, I'm not a front end developer, but you make it understandable for us too. And we've got a question here. Is it possible to have the perfect accessibility store in Lighthouse and still have made the most inaccessible site ever? So I'm guessing what that person's getting at is these scores, these magic numbers, don't necessarily always mean it's perfect.
So yes, they don't mean it's perfect at all. If you get a really high score, you still need to do the manual testing that I mentioned, because automated testing can't test all assistive technology, and it can't validate For example, it can test that the alt text is on an image, but it can't check that the alt text provided is correct in the context of the image, or it can check that there's a page title, but it can't check that the page title is correct in the contents of the page. So you still do have to do manual testing. In response to the question, there's a great article, and I'm happy to share, tweet out a link. It's written by, please forgive me, I can't say his surname, Manuel Muchevich, who has shown how you can create a site with the most perfect 100% score and have it completely inaccessible and unusable. So I can share that link after this conference.
That would be good.
After the Unconference.
Thank you. And I had a question about, you had your, was it Cypress scripts that you had? Although that's maybe a lot of work up front to create. Can you get a lot of reusability? Like once you've made it for one site, can you then reuse a lot of that script kind of on others? So
yes, the scripts I wrote, I wanted to use the sitemap for it. By using the sitemap, it meant as long as another site's got a sitemap, we can do the smoke testing, and that allows the reusability, because you can then have create the same assets across the projects. Where reusability falls down is around if you've got custom logins and you want to test the accessibility behind those logins. But yes, if you do the smoke testing side, it's just the same script across different sites.
Great. And this might be a question that is partly for you, Rachel, but kind of takes us on nicely to Dennis and his unit testing. What tools are there for the kind of visual testing and for accessibility, for example, and then even for checking that the site in general looks like it should? Is there any automated tools we can use there?
So the best tools for testing accessibility are, in all honesty, the tools that people who use assistive technology would have. So you would use, on Windows, for example, you'd use NVDA, and on a Mac, you'd use VoiceOver, and they do work slightly different, so it's important to test against both. You might use zoom magnification software as well to make sure that works. Yeah, so there's various tools. It's just using the tools that people who use assistive technology use.
Awesome, thanks. And Dennis, over to you for some of your unit testing questions. We had one here. What tips do you have for mocking services that are overly complex or have lots of dependencies that can't be null?
So yeah, not all services are as easy to mock, of course, as in the examples that I did. But if it's your own code and your own services, I would, question why they are so complex and non-testable, and hopefully rewrite them to make them testable. I do that all the time in my day-to-day job. Try to rewrite services that's been built without tests that are not testable. But if it's not your own services, if it's like Umbraco services or some other services, it's not possible to mock them. I usually wrap them in an abstraction layer. So if you have a complex service and you want to make it testable, I create a iComplex service interface that I register in my IOC container, and then I create an complex service abstraction for it that I can make it testable. Yeah, that's usually the approach I go for when I can't get around mocking it properly.
Sounds good. And what's great is you're always blogging, so I'm sure you've got some examples of that on your blog, or if you don't, I'm sure you'll write one to share with folks, because it's a really good place to look for tips on Umbraco and unit testing.
Thank you.
This is a good question. It's one I had as well. Have you written any tests for Umbraco v9?
No, unfortunately, a bit embarrassing. lagging on my V9 experimenting. I'm hoping I will be introduced soon to a V9 project at work, so I can spend some time on writing more tests and create examples, and of course update the documentation on our. But yeah, hopefully after the summer when V9 is released.
Yeah, I think you're being a little bit unfair on yourself saying you're lagging behind. It's not even a release candidate yet, so
No.
give yourself a break, Dennis. But yeah, it'll be really good to see what folks do for V9. And there was another question that someone, Joe, commented saying for V9, would an Umbraco test project make a good example of a .NET New template? That might be a good way for people to get set up. So if folks haven't seen, then .NET 5 and the new way of working, there's this concept of templates, and we've probably, if you've had a look at the beta, you've probably seen in the documentation and the command line, you can do .NET New, or within Visual Studio, there's File New, and then there's templates. You can do .NET New Umbraco, or you can do Umbraco Package, and it lets you get set up basically a lot easier. You don't have to do the old-fashioned, I'll create an empty .NET project and then I'll install the NuGet package. It kind of does it for you. So maybe an example of one of those with testing built in and a framework for testing built in might be a good place to encourage unit testing.
Yeah, that sounds great. You know, anything that would speed up and make it. That was kind of the whole idea behind the GitHub project, that if someone just wants to try it out now and they have a few spare minutes and they just want to get a few green tests, that's, you know, you can just clone it and run it. But having a template would be even better, I guess.
Yeah, it seems like a really good way we could put the power of the community to good use, and maybe we can create a community one to, like you say, having your GitHub repo and examples like that is perfect ways to. The best way to learn is by example. Like, you learn so much from real life examples, so I think that would be a really good idea. And on to yourself, Simone, we have got a few questions around the DevOps side. One of them was, what's your view on other infrastructure solutions, for example, Terraform, or, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, Pulumi, compared to ARM?
Well, the fact that is that the Terraform and the other one I have to say I never heard about as well. So and there are also other that they are a bit more agnostic on where you deploy it. So with Terraform you can create a VM that you can install on AWS if you have an internal, for example, on premises. If you have a VMware Sphere infrastructure, you could also use Terraform to create resources on-prem without being on the cloud. And you can also do it for Azure, actually, because there is Azure also supports Terraform. But the ARM template is much more, let's say, it's done on purpose to be run on Azure. And so you have all the small things that you can do on Azure. And Terraform is YAML, and ARM template is this kind of super complicated JSON format, which is a bit scary at first. But yeah, I personally like to use ARM template because that's how I started working, and you have a lot of samples you can download from GitHub, from Azure directly. But now there is a thing that is on preview, which is called Bicep. Basically, it's like a domain-specific language that will compile into ARM template, and then this ARM template can be then deployed using the AZ CLI. And it's much easier. It's just like writing code, more or less. So I think I will probably, in this site I'm putting up on GitHub, I will probably make an example as well with the biceps, because it's much more simple and easier. Like this, instead of having a 3,000 line of code, you go down to 500. It's much nicer.
That would be good, actually, to see an example, because I've heard of Bicep, but I've not had time to look into it yet. So it would be really good to see an example of that. And it's always really good. Like, some of us had a bit of a chat in one of the breakout rooms yesterday about how we do DevOps for our Umbraco sites. And I find it really great talking to different people, because everyone does things either slightly different or the same way as you. And it's always good, you know, validation that other people are doing stuff the same way. And Yeah, it's something we could literally talk about for a full hour. I think, like, the different ways people do things. But yeah, please do share the example, because seeing those examples is the most valuable thing. A bit like with the unit testing. We do have another question. Do you do all infrastructure updates through ARM? And do you ever face issues where updates are made directly in Azure but not synced back to the templates?
Well, what I do is do everything on via ARM template. That's one of the things, because if you start playing with infrastructure on directly on the portal, next time you reapply the template, the thing will be destroyed. Unless you create a new resource that you're not managing. For example, I don't know, you set up, I have no idea, a cognitive service to do image recognition. If it's not part of your ARM template, then it will stay there. But if, for example, you start touching some parameter of your website or your database, and those are also managed via ARM template, the ARM template will override those information. So it's better to have everything on ARM template, unless it's just a temporary thing that you want to do to try out, and then you just want to make sure that have a nice way to roll back to this known state. And that's also the reason why I put this Umbraco version as a parameter, because that's one of, actually many people consider it as a bug of ARM template, but people from Microsoft say it's the correct way, so it's a bit of difficult to discuss. But because ARM templates are supposed to be incremental, so if you deploy something, you should not destroy your website and create a new one. You should just apply a bit of change. But the problem is that the web settings, the app settings inside your web app, are considered as a whole unit. So if you add a parameter, app setting directly, it will be destroyed once you apply the ARM template, which doesn't contain it. So that's a bit tricky. That's why you have to first fetch it out and then apply it again, because that's the only way to make sure if someone does an update online, install Umbraco online, you don't roll back using a previous version because the ARM template has changed. So yeah, hopefully there will be a way to fix it. If we manage to get rid of this configuration from the web config, it will be the best solution, like we did for the automatic installation.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me on nicely to what my next question was for V9. I don't know if you plan on updating your site to V9 or upgrading to V9, but in general, is there any benefits or differences with the approach that you take to your ARM templates now that we'll be using .NET Core, .NET 5?
Well, most of the things are the same. If you do a website, you will still use the same storage account, search service, app insight. The only good thing is that you might be able to run it on Linux, on a web app on Linux instead of Windows, and that will drop significantly the cost, because the cost of a web app on Linux is half of the cost of the one on Windows. Everything else will stay the same. And if I'm not mistaken, this installation version is not in any configuration in V9, so that's a good thing. And probably everything is the same. You will need to configure differently the web settings, because in V9, as you know, I'm part also of the NetCore community group. And the biggest problem was the configuration, because in V9 and .NET Core, .NET 5, there is this JSON format and hierarchical. You can have multiple versions, one on top of each other, which overrides each other. So the way you configure it in the portal will be different. So that's a bit different. But apart from that, everything will be more or less the same.
Cool. And I have a final question, but for all of you, is what are you excited about in the next year between now and the next Codegarden? What are you most excited about in the Umbraco community? Kat, I'll start with you.
I think I'm just looking forward to seeing how people are going to use V9 and just how it's going to develop over the next sort of year, and what we'll be talking about this time next year in terms of what people have been doing with it. I think that's probably the most exciting bit.
Awesome. Sean?
Yeah, looking forward to what we might be able to do from Umbraco 9. How can we, going beyond just creating sites in it, how we can extend more of the actual functionality, and seeing what some people have already been doing on some of the sessions and putting that into practice. Setting up the upgrade process, hopefully a bit smoother than 8 to 9, but yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's really exciting to think like at the next Codegarden we'll have case studies and real life examples of V9, and if my maths is right, V10 will be out by next Codegarden, which is a scary thought that we'll be 2 versions ahead. But yeah, I'm really excited to see, like you mentioned, what people will build. And Rachel, what about you?
So I'm looking forward to V10, because that'll be the rewrite of the back office for everyone, and just looking forward to the upcoming things around all the improvements everyone keeps making around accessibility. It's really good to see all that coming through. So thank you to everyone as well who's been working on that.
Yeah, and thank you to you and the whole accessibility community group. The stuff that y'all have been doing is so impressive. I'm really looking forward to seeing how it goes. We were chatting in a previous chat, weren't we, about hopefully the starter kit, the new starter kit we can make like accessible as default, you know?
Yeah, I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see accessible starter kits and the grid. I haven't looked at validated the grid in a long time, but you know, making sure that anything that comes out of HQ that we can work with as developers, from forms to the grid and to the rich text editor. Looking forward to seeing that be more accessible, like I say.
Awesome. And Dennis, what about yourself?
Well, it's hard not to mention V9, of course. I look forward to working more with .NET Core. It's been something I've worked with .NET Core, but not nowhere near as much as I've done with Framework. So I'm still very comfortable in .NET Framework. So I'm looking forward working more with .NET Core. Yeah, I'm excited to try out some static sites. Xstatic, the package made me really interested in. I've already converted a traditional site to a static one, and yeah, those sort of things. It feels like we're coming back to static sites, but we can still use the CMS like Umbraco with it. That's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, I'll not make the same ecstatic joke that Lottie made earlier, but I really want to. Yeah, it is cool that we're back to static, but still dynamic. But the benefits of static, it's exciting. I'm not saying that I'm fully up to speed with it. It's one of those things I think I need to. But packages like ecstatic mean that we don't really need to be the experts in it. We can use the smarts of all those other people that are making these packages. And Simone, what about yourself?
Well, I guess I have to repeat what everyone has said. It's going to be V9, and but especially also I would be interested in see the uptake of V9 among the community, because it's a big step, it's a big change, and especially with the new I don't know if it's been announced. Yeah, probably it's been announced already. That these packages with it's going to be only NuGet. You don't have the NuGet. You cannot upload anything on the backend anymore, and I've more the technology side of it, because I'm working on V9 already since a year or something, so I know that as well. But it will be really interesting to see how these new changes are going to affect the Umbraco community as a whole. There are going to be everybody moving as soon as possible to V9, or there are going to be people that are still trying to keep on V8 for a long time. And then, of course, I will be excited next year to see everybody in live, not as a virtual screen webcast.
Oh, I really, 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 really hope so. I can't see really any more times. Yeah, I really hope next year we're all in real life and can actually hug and high five and watch talks in real life and walk between different stages rather than just clicking a different button in a tab and sitting in this desk all day. But no, thank you so much, everyone. for your talks this morning and for joining this session and for answering the questions. It's much appreciated, and a big high five. I think now is a coffee break. And after the coffee break on this stage, there's a talk by Michael on reviewing code, which I think will be really, really exciting. And one on content modelling over on stage 2 with Phil, Sam and Lisa. So loads of exciting talks coming up this afternoon. See you all soon.
Bye.
Bye.